just to celebrate the centenary of George Martin, the legendary producer and fifth Beatle. I thought I'd read from the account of when he first met the Beatles in 1962. So in May 1962, the Beatles were in the middle of their residency in Hamburg. They were playing in a club there when an excitably written telegram arrived from London. Their manager, Brian Epstein, informed them that he'd secured a recording contract with a subsidiary of EMI Records and that they should return home for an initial recording session. Actually, this wasn't quite true. What he'd secured was an audition, but he'd kind of framed it as if it was an initial recording session. So it was all a bit confusing and no one quite understood what the status of the band was when the Beatles turned up and started recording. What had actually happened was that Brian Epstein had sent George Martin a tape of the Beatles performing a few songs. And George Martin said, I wasn't too impressed with the tape Brian Epstein had played me. There was something there, but I couldn't find out whether it was worthwhile or not. It's a very interesting example of how something that's new and a little bit different seems weird even to a record producer like George Martin, who was a very musical guy, but just couldn't quite figure out what the Beatles were or what this kind of raw energy was that they had. And this was not the sophisticated band that they were by the late 60s. This was a much rawer commodity. So what George Martin said to Brian Epstein was, what I said to Brian was, if you want me to judge them on what you're playing me, I'm sorry, I'll have to turn you down. But he was so disappointed, I felt really sorry for him, actually, because he was such an earnest young man. So I gave him a lifeline. I said, if you want to bring them down from Liverpool, I'll give them an hour in the studio. So again, it's an interesting case of a very overzealous manager in Brian Epstein's case. And, you know, goodness, the Beatles owed Brian Epstein a great deal for his zeal in trying to get them a contract. You know, he really worked hard to get it. And you don't get these things unless you work hard, do you?